Welcome to the Mommy Chronicles with Denise Davis May and Tanya Scott Williams, your partners in raising phenomenal children.
We are so happy to be back with the Mommy Chronicles. I'm Denise Davis May.
And I'm Tanya Scott Williams.
And we're here to talk about some pretty serious issues in our community. And we are blessed today to have some awesome women here to help us kind of parse out some of these discussions. So we will start with introducing Tasha Scott McDonald.
Yes,
or McDonald.
And I am so happy that I get to introduce Tasha Scott. She's a phenomenal woman. She's a motivational speaker, leadership trainer, and life coach. Tasha, as well as Sheyan, who I'll introduce in a bit, she has had an opportunity in the public space and from the stage in her work to work specifically with women, and in those spaces has had women share with her some of their struggles. And as we've talked over the years, really, Tasha, about the work that you do, sometimes in those conversations, women are struggling with, if not thoughts of suicide, certainly depression. And it is obvious that this is an issue that is really important in our community, but it isn't talked about enough. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate sometimes that we have these very public celebrity suicides that generates conversations. And one of the things that we wanted to do, certainly with the Mommy Chronicles, was not just wait on that tide, but just sort of keep the conversation going. So Tasha is going to speak to us from her experience on the stage and in some of those encounters with women. And I'll go ahead and introduce our other guest, Sheyan Webb-Christburg. Prayerfully, she'll be joining us shortly. Sheyan is an author. She's a youth advocate and humanitarian, and her work spans decades. And she also works with women, young people in what she's done for the community. And just like Tasha has had opportunities to share with women, to hear their stories, to hear their struggles, and point them in the direction towards help and resources in the community that can be of help to them. So we wanted to bring them into this conversation so that they can kind of share what they've experienced over the years and just talk about it, really.
Yeah. And finally, we have Dr. Rhonda Gilbon. She is a licensed clinical social worker and a certified leadership coach. She's a professor, an author, a scholar. She is on a faculty at Morgan State University in their doctoral social work program. She's traveled all over the world and is highly respected for her leadership capacity, particularly as it relates to development but more importantly, she is a clinician who has over 35 years of practice experience. She works in the field of domestic violence. She served as an executive director for a shelter program for women who have experienced interpersonal violence. She is a private practitioner where she serves women and families and does family counseling. And so we wanted to bring Dr. Gilbon in to speak to this issue from the clinical perspective so that we can better understand some of the issues that we're faced with. We want to start to kind of bring the room, if you will, into a space of reflection by reading a poem that was submitted by Ms. Catherine Fuller.
Is entitled Struggling to Exhale. Trying to release the air somewhere between your lungs, your esophagus, your mouth. You gasp for air from the unknown. You releasing the anxiety, the pressure, the stress that weighs you down from the pains that life brings. Sometimes it's just easier to forget to breathe. Wondering sometimes what would happen if breath escapes your body and not return. Would it be torment? Or would joy be found in knowing you won't have to deal with life? Misery loves company, so you force yourself to breathe. Inhaling and exhaling is a daily routine. But sometimes you find yourself holding your breath for long periods of time. Somewhere in the back of your mind, a voice tells you to just let go of life. Misery loves company, and breathing is an act where the mind tells the body to draw air into and expel air out from your lungs. But what if the mind suddenly stops communicating with the lungs to not release air that is necessary to pump blood to your heart? So you wrestle with the thought of inhaling or throwing in the towel. Then someone smiles at you. It warms the core of your heart. At the possibility of love, you exhale and breathe.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So as we think about how folks struggle to breathe so often, I wanted to start with Dr. Gilbon to kind of ground us in the realities of the statistics and the nature of mental health in our community. What are some of the primary emerging mental health and emotional health issues you and your colleagues are coming across in practice?
Well, I mean, I think that the more we know, the more things are really kind of the same in terms of, I mean, the emerging stuff is really just stuff kind of circling back around again. And so I think that as the rest of the world seems to be experiencing some crisis, we're always at the intersection of crisis. So I think because of that, a lot of the things that we see in the news in terms of the suicides and, you know, different behaviors, we're seeing these things in our community all the time. And of course, as I mentioned, and Black women are at the intersection of everything that is oppressive. And so because of that, you know, we live in that space all the time. But I certainly will say that I think that when we see this in the media, it certainly does give us more permission to get help. And so I appreciate that because with the hashtag Me Too, you get more people coming forward to get help because it doesn't feel quite as taboo and quite as it's only me. The same thing I would say with, you know, depression and then anything else that is happening publicly. I think that the more media attention gives us more permission to seek help. And so I do think that we see more people seeking help, but the issues and the problems and the challenges themselves, they're always there. They're always simmering, you know, beneath the surface, but people come out for more help. And I think that that makes that a good thing.
Mm-hmm. So you've spoken about help-seeking behaviors. That is one of the challenges, as both you and I know, in the literature, Black women and other women of color are identified as not seeking help as often for similar emotional health challenges. How is it different for Black women in terms of the process of seeking help, getting the right help, knowing where to seek help?
Yeah, so I want to go back to something that to me precedes the seeking help, to just the fact that sometimes stuff shows up different for us. I know in Terry Williams' book, Black Pain, she talked a lot about how you know, when Black women are depressed, often some of the ways that it shows up as being angry. And so that our anger is often an indication of our pain. But, you know, because Black women have so much pain and have so much stuff, we actually walk around angry, many of us, all the time. And so that becomes what people see as being normal, as opposed to recognizing, no, that sister's hurting. You know, that sister may be depressed. And so I think that some of the ways that our mental health challenges show up looks different than it does for other people. So then when we try to seek help, then there is a misunderstanding in terms of even giving us the support that we need, because, you know, oh, she always mad. There's nothing wrong with her, you know, and so it's a disconnect between how our symptoms show up and what others are looking for. Thus, we don't get the support and the treatment that we need to have.
Wow. Yeah. So you've spoken to some of the misunderstandings, right, in relationship to the presentation of mental health challenges for Black women. What are some of the ways, because you talk about Black women being at the intersection of all of this in the community, and I've been reading over the last few weeks with my focus on children that the younger African American children are beginning to increase in rates of suicide, so much so that they are at the highest rate for suicide from ages, I think, 5 to 12. That came out last year, so it's not new data. We recognize, right, what mothers face as a result of trying to manage not just their emotional health, but the emotional health of their children, who are living in the very same circumstances and challenges that they are. What are some of the varied ways that the community can provide support? So one of the challenges, and I think you sort of addressed it in that, because people stereotype Black women, it then places a barrier up for their seeking right help in traditional settings. So they end up back in the community with these very same challenges, being mad or being perceived as mad. What are some of the ways that the community and some of the more traditional mechanisms can be employed to provide support to Black women and children and families related to emotional health?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it, definitely there needs to be a lot more education in the community, and particularly, I mean, definitely within our personal Black community, but also within the professional community of people that are, you know, working with Black families and, you know, working with, you know, Black women and their children, that people need to seek more knowledge and information and not just rely on what they learned, you know, in school. Like, and, you know, continuing education training actually needs to have a lot more culturally, you know, culturally aware, you know, I guess things that are offered, you know, for CEU training. But as far as the community goes, and I think that the community is a huge part of it, because I think that part of the disconnect for us is that prior to desegregation, everything that we were happened in a smaller community. So there was a lot more capacity to be able to support whatever it was that was happening with us. But now that we're on the big stage and now that we're in the big world, a lot of things can be missed because it isn't the same eye and the same community. Like, I raised my sons in Maryland and my whole family was in Michigan. And so that I wasn't there on a regular, consistent basis to be able to provide the support that we often had, you know, traditionally, you know, in prior times. And so I do think that we need to figure out ways to recreate community, recreate the circle so that there is that kind of support, so that none of us feel like we're functioning and operating in isolation with very few, you know, support systems. And I think that is, you know, a huge part of it. I see you guys smiling because yeah.
You're actually speaking to where this podcast was birthed from. Denise and I met about a decade ago when our daughters were in the Montgomery Youth Corral. And so I noticed the sister in the room, and we would kind of talk to each other afterwards. We wound up, you know, speaking about things that were happening with the corral, and then we wound up talking afterwards. And then sometimes the conversations would wind up in the parking lot. We would talk about, you know, what was going on with our daughters, and then it folded into community. And then suddenly we realized that we were reaching out to each other in a way that we were creating community and family. She's not from Montgomery originally. I'm not either. So I'm nowhere near, of course, my mother and grandmother are deceased, but I'm nowhere near the roots of my family. She wasn't either, in a sense, now so a little bit more so. But the whole point was we wanted to create family for other folk. I knew that I enjoyed those conversations with Denise because I could talk about what was happening with my child. I could talk about some things that I was struggling with. I'm blessed to have a community of women that provide that for me, but we started thinking about other women. You know, we realized that we have moved all over the place. We've moved away from mom and them. We've moved away from auntie. You know, we can't just walk down the street to a house to get a cup of sugar and conversation. We can't do that anymore. And it is a struggle. Being isolated in the suburbs is challenging. Having to pack up my daughter and take her across town to be with her friends because there was no one in the community that looked like her or was welcoming to her. Those are harsh realities. So yes, creating that community because it also offered a place to work through emotional challenges, depending on each other in a way that would allow us to be able to move through these spaces and into healing places. That's kind of how we sort of started out. And she said, we should create a podcast. And I was like, okay, what does that look like?
For sure.
Yeah. So I think one of the traditional ways has been re-engaging communities. Can we create new traditions? You know, what are the new traditions? And at this point, as we kind of segue into these discussions from the clinical perspective to how we're handling it now, what are the things that we all of us are mothers, all of us are Black women, all of us have families, however they're constructed. And what are we doing that's working? What are some of the challenges that we've experienced? Some of the fails, we like to say, some of the failures that turned into lessons. Let's now talk about that. And I want to bring Tasha in to kind of talk about some of what she's seen, some of what she's experienced, some of what she shared in terms of growing emotionally to get to the point of healing.
So yeah, for that word community, I was smiling when you said that, because that for me has been the life-changing thing is community. And what I'm seeing is, you mentioned the suburbs, Tanya, that there's a lot of people that are in places like the suburbs and other areas that are suffering in silence. And the thing about it is they're surrounded by people, but they're feeling isolated because they don't know how to be real around the people they're surrounded by. And it goes back to that whole, especially as Black women, being seen as superwoman. And when we have that superwoman syndrome, it's almost like people can't handle seeing us any other way. And that puts a lot of pressure and false expectations as well. So for me as a leader in what I'm doing in the community, I felt a sense of responsibility because I was one of those women. I was suffering in silence. And if it wasn't for the therapists and the counselors reaching out for the help, I don't know where I would have been. I don't know what my outcome would have been, you know? So I needed the trained professionals to help me, but it also, at the same time, it was a responsibility after going through my own healing process that I said, I can't turn my head and act like this is not going on. I've got to help other people. I have to be a part of the community.
To your point about not being able to handle Black women not being superwoman, the pressure to always be ready to nurture, to help other folks through their struggles and adding to your stresses, and then discovering sometimes that people aren't willing to hear you in your messes, you know? And you said once that you've had women who come up to you after some of your speaking engagements and shared some things with you. What does that look like for you when you step down off the stage after you've had a speaking event? What are some of the conversations that you're hearing from women?
I'm hearing well, I got to backtrack because I think what happens is because I'm sharing my own stuff, from a real, authentic place, it creates that safe space for women to approach me as a stranger and be able to confide things in me: depression, suicidal thoughts, feeling alone, feeling isolated. And the women that come to me, a lot of times you would not be able to look at them and tell that there was anything wrong or that they had any insecurity or any whatever. But again, it goes back to that community, creating that safe space for people, you know, to be able to share. And again, going back to the resources in the form of therapists and counseling, for me, I also have a responsibility to say, you know what, I may not be the one that can fix you, so to speak, or help you, but I can refer you to somebody else and do it from a non-judgmental place.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part. So what you've done, Tasha, is to move past some of the boundaries that we've put up. I've shared with Tanya, and certainly have shared with the young women. I have a 15, almost 16-year-old, and there's this discourse around women not trusting other women.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I hear that frequently. Yeah. And they wear it almost as a badge of honor.
Right.
You know, I don't fool with women. Mm-hmm. I have mostly men friends, you know, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. Right. But one of my colleagues and a sister that I really appreciate has this adage that she says, I don't fool with women who don't fool with women. Right? Because if you know, what is it that we are projecting that we can't trust to share our challenges, our successes, our paths with others? So I appreciate you and appreciate your effort to make it okay. Rhonda, Tasha Scott does a women's luncheon, in the name of it, Tasha?
Ladies Who Lunch.
Right, and she does it monthly around varied topics, but primarily around overcoming, right? And so it's a work, right, that comes with a word, and it takes effort. It takes a freeing of yourself to be able to do that. So I appreciate that.
And may I add to that point? I'm sorry, to that point, a lot of what you're saying, the reason why is because there are unresolved issues that are stimulated either from youth or from something in the past where there's been that unresolved thing and they haven't talked about it, they haven't addressed it. So then it becomes this thing, oh, I just don't fool with them. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, I'm like, we need to have the conversations. Mm-hmm. We need to talk about the elephant in the room if we're going to heal from it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And so Rhonda, speak to some of that, right? Some of the because much of our many of our challenges emotionally are have to do with how we see ourselves reflected in the world, right? How we understand others' perceptions of us, and expectations, I think one of you mentioned earlier. So what does that look like in terms of moving to a healing space, whether that's self-work, work in the space of a group of women, whether it's spiritual work, what does that look like?
Yeah, so that's interesting because one of the things that I jotted down when Tasha was talking is she talked about the use of self and how that seemed to be so central to her capacity to work with and help other women. And the thing that I find so great about that is that it also is important in therapy. It kind of is the opposite of what we've been taught, but you have to know how to do it properly. We're taught as helpers and clinicians not to use yourself very much, to use yourself very minimally. you know, because you don't want to project your stuff onto the client. But if you are skilled and trained well as a therapist, you can use self very effectively. And I think it actually becomes something that helps to generate quicker healing for the people that you're working with. So I use myself a lot. But I use it in a way that challenges the people that I work with to do their own work and to, you know, and to get better themselves. One of the things I tell my clients on day one, you can't come to me and stay sick. You know, this is not white therapy. This is Black therapy. And I tell that to white people too. You get white therapy someplace else, but here you get Black therapy, and Black therapy requires you to do work. You get homework, you got to journal, and you got to get better, because the one thing you can't be doing is going around telling people, oh, I've been seeing Dr. Rhonda, and then they like, and you ain't getting no better? No. That cannot happen. So even the ideal that, to me, one of the ways we help each other, we know how tough we are, and we know that we can handle a lot. So we also can handle our own healing process. And so I'm not going to baby a Black woman through a healing process. I'm going to challenge her, just like you worked hard to help other people. I'm going to challenge you to work hard to help your own self. And so that probably, you know, every other day I wonder if somebody gonna sue me, you know, or something or another. But I just believe that, you know, I can't work harder than you're gonna work. And I'm going to teach you, I'm going to help you learn the skills, and then I'm going to expect you to really use those things in your own life. And you can't come and just vent and purge. I'm not a dumping ground. You can vent and purge some, but what else are we going to do in terms of moving forward and healing?
I just have one question for you, Dr. Gilbon. When are you going to set up a practice in Montgomery?
Well, I do teletherapy. I do teletherapy.
You know, just put it out there for the universe.
So she does teletherapy and teletherapy.
I do teletherapy. And actually, I want to mention that related to another question that I think social media is a great space for us to shift the paradigm in terms of how we support each other. Just about, I guess, 3 weeks ago, myself and two of my classmates from Flint, Michigan, we were on Facebook having this conversation because somebody wanted to do a 30-day lose 10-pound challenge. Before you knew it, literally in 15 minutes, we had a Facebook page called Flint Girls Rock. In 48 hours, we had over 2,000 women from Flint that had joined that page. And so now we're talking about additional things that we can do to help our community, to support and help each other, because we're all dispersed all over the country. But at the end of the day, we all know we went to one of them 4 high schools. We all know somebody that knew somebody, and we feel very comfortable with each other, even if we don't know each other. So that creates a great space for us to be able to provide support. So while I think we kind of tend to have a tendency to think of younger generations as being the ones that are using social media, a lot of us are using social media in ways that are productive. And I think we should figure out ways to do that, to build more communities. And I just think that that's so important for us to do.
Yes.
Wow.
So this is helpful. One of the as we've been discussing over the last 3 months, certainly over the last 2 months, when we've had these 2 suicides of 2 pretty prominent people, and so the discourse comes back up again, often though in spaces that don't touch folk in, you know, the communities that we typically are serving. And I've been watching people, you know, talk about, well, you know, when I'm depressed, I just want somebody to talk to. I don't want anyone to tell me what to do to fix it. And I agree. I talk all the time about I'm that person that I'll listen and say, woo, woo, okay, so now what are we going to do? Right? That's who I am. That's my personality. That's who I am clinically. And it works for some folks, doesn't work for others. But where are we when how do we prepare people just to listen? Because some folks are saying, when I come to you, I don't want a plan. They want to dump, right? I don't want a plan. I just want to release it. I just want to be able to tell you. How do we help prepare the community to just hear, but also hear with discernment, so that you know when you're hearing something that is possibly going to end in something much more tragic?
Was that directed at both of us, I guess?
Dr. Wilbon, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So I agree. I do think that we certainly have to provide a space for, it's interesting because as you were talking, it reminded me of Martin and Martin's paradigm about moaning, mourning, and mourning. And the moaning is I got to get this out. I got to say it. I got to complain. I got to let you know what's going on. And then it's the mourning, and that's the MOURN, which is we mourn the losses that we've had. So it's like we do have to have space to talk about it. Then we have to have space to actually be able to mourn. But then we also have to move on to the last morning, and that's the MORN. It will be a better day. It will be a good day. But you're absolutely right. We can't do the great day before we've gone through the process of getting there. And everybody does that at their own pace.
Right.
But I think we just have to remind people when they're in the moaning phase that great days are coming. And great days will actually happen again. We don't want people to get stuck in the moaning. And I think some people do because the pain is so severe. And so, but I want us to continue to remind people that better days are coming. But I do think we do. We have to allow people to be in whatever space they're in. And if they're in a space of pain, they've got to work through that. And that's going to be at each person's own individual pace of what that is. And so I appreciate you circling back around to making sure we address that, because in some ways, not to address it really does diminish a person's own experience. And that's not okay, because you don't want people to push stuff down to get to a better place. You really do want people to purge and to release and to let go and get to a better space.
Tasha, we kind of go back to Ladies Who Lunch, primarily because of what you decided to do at the start of the year, which is a sort of what Dr. Wilbon and you were just saying in terms of community, preparing the community to hear and directing folks towards resources. What you decided to do this year was to focus on nonprofits who are doing work in the community, because in those spaces, people have come with needs.
Yes.
So now you're bringing in the directors, the executives, people who've created organizations that can see to some of those needs. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes. What I found is that a lot of times, because people are, I don't want to say this in a bad way, so y'all hear my heart, people are a lot of times absorbed with their own pain and their own stuff, that sometimes it's hard to see that it helps sometimes to help others. And that's a way to get out of your own self and out of your own stuff. You know what I mean? So in my own working with the nonprofit community, I found that even in our community, a lot of people still don't know what resources are available. So I decided to use the platform to promote that, especially when it comes to our women. So we've had speakers address domestic violence, alcoholism, homelessness, and I know society paints pictures of these as one way, but this affects all of us, so I just think the more equipped we are with the resources, the better we can be in a position to hear and help.
There is something to be said about working in working, actually helping to heal yourself.
Yeah.
Lisa Nichols often says, you know, energy grows where energy goes. Basically, whatever you focus your energy on is, well, where it's going to be.
Yeah.
To be able to move past the pain, but, you know, we kind of have to get there.
Right.
But then to be able to focus on someone else's needs and help them can be a part of your own healing.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things that fuels me, is because I know what it was like to be like hanging on by a thread, to just want to throw in the towel and give up, and then to be able to have people like Dr. Wilbon come in and shed light. And I love how you said you start with your stories, because I think there's a lot of trust issues. Like, you can't really help me if you don't get me. You know, and I need to know that you get what I'm going through, you know, and then that helps me to let people in. And I feel like that's the same for our community, is there's got to be that trust issue where people understand, I get where you are, but you don't have to stay where you are.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Dr. Wilbon, after the recent celebrity suicides, you know, the Twitters, as Denise says, and other social media platforms were just blowing up with people venting. And then I noticed on my own page, like within the community of folks that I'm connected with, I started to notice some people in my community were referring to the church and its failure to address the congregations or the community's emotional needs, or even how the church has not been willing to listen to folks when they've talked about suicide, going into counseling and having pastors tell folks to put prayer on it. Now, a lot of churches are beginning to shift, well, not a lot, some churches are beginning to shift away from that thinking, but clearly with a number of people who, there was like a common thread where they didn't feel as if they could get the help from the places that they go to worship on Sundays, and how that was problematic because it made them feel like failures as Christians, right? And then at the same time, they've got these other burdens that they're carrying. So can you speak to that piece about where the church is or should be, or how they need to be listening to the folks who are showing up every Sunday?
Yeah, so first I want to start off with, I got to give a plug in for my church, because I go to Reed Temple AME Zion in Glendale, Maryland, and we do all of that. And I could not worship in a church that was not doing all of that. As a mental health professional, I mean, I appreciate that we have a whole mental health ministry. I mean, we have ministries around every single thing you can think about in terms of helping people. And our pastor preaches about it, you know, from the pulpit. And so I never leave church on Sunday feeling like my emotional needs have not been addressed. And I think that we all, you know, all of us who worship should worship in a place that does that for us, that, you know, the spiritual and the emotional connection, you know, and the mental and intellectual, you know, connection is also important. And so there is no disconnect between that. And I think that the churches should see themselves as a place where people come, you know, not just for spiritual food and healing, but for life support, you know, food and healing. And I think churches that are not at that place, I'm hoping that they're moving in that direction, because our communities are always going to need that. We always have, and we always will. And so we have to make sure that our churches are a refuge and a place where people can go, you know, no matter what it is. The Bible says, come as you are. And if you come as someone in pain and needing help, you know, the church can put a prayer on it, but they better put some other stuff on it as well. And support as well, because, you know, it's just so critical.
What kinds of questions do you think they can ask? If not from the pulpit on Sunday, certainly in those Wednesday night Bible studies or those kinds of things, just folding into, you know, between communion and taking up the offering, just some things that they may want to fold into some of those discussions from the pulpit.
Well, I do think that, I mean, the first thing is, the one thing that I'm learning is that there's nothing that the Bible does not address. And there's a spiritual relationship between almost everything. I was having severe cramping in my feet and legs. And when I connected the Bible verses associated with that, it talked about how when you're thinking too much, you're not releasing things to God. And as a result, it will show up, you know, in your legs and feet and pain. And so I bet most people don't know that that's in the Bible.
Okay.
And so I think that the church needs to let people know, you Google something and Bible verses, the Bible got something that it says about it. And I think, you know, we have to remind people that, you know, that there's a lot of good information there. And so from the pulpit, I think that the ministers and the pastors should let people know that whatever you're going through, there is something in the Bible that addresses that for you. And so, and with, I mean, like I said, with, you can Google anything and connect it to Bible verse. And so you don't even have to wait for the sermon on it. You can find out for yourself, because there may not be a sermon all the time that is directed towards your actual need, but the information and the knowledge and God's healing for us is available for, you know, to us all. And I think that that's another thing that has to be, you know, preached from the pulpit, that we all have the same capacity and the same, and when I say the same capacity to link up and connect to God and his power and what he has for us. And so, you know, I don't have to go through my pastor. I don't have to wait till Wednesday Bible study. I don't have to wait till Sunday. I do run up in my church on Sunday, and I'm happy to do that. But during the week, if something happens to me, I don't hold on to it until Sunday. I know I have a relationship myself. And so even teaching from the pulpit about people strengthening their relationships, you know, with God. I have two young adult sons that I know don't go to church, but I don't challenge them to go to church. I challenge them to build a relationship with God. They'll get to church when that's the space that they're in, but they got to get to the relationship with God, you know, in the meantime. And so that's something I think that we should challenge each other to do, is to make sure that we have that spiritual foundation and that spiritual relationship.
I agree. And if I could just add to that, wholeheartedly agree, because during the week, from Sunday to Sunday, we that call ourselves Christians have to be very mindful that we're not putting shackles on people with our words, you know, by just pray about it, or just, you know, where's your faith, you know, because a lot of times the church is the place that the pain came from, or was the source, or even God himself, you know, and we just have to be in that non-judgmental space and be so mindful that we represent the church from Monday through Saturday and on Sunday as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
This is going wonderfully. We're trying to keep track of time. We've had some difficulty connecting Miss Christburg. We were hoping that she can get to a computer. She's having some trouble calling in, and we're having some trouble trying to see where she is and how to connect with her. So we're hoping that if anyone, we recognize that we're taping this, we will share the taped version on all of our social media platform, on Facebook, on the Twitters, and we have something else, don't we? Instagram. So we'll share it on all of those so people can connect to this. Before we move to the end of this, or moving toward the end of this, I want both of you to kind of share, you know, your contact information, how people can get in touch with you, your social media platforms, any other information you'd like to share. We'll start with Tasha.
Yeah, so my website is tashamscott.com. I am on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram and Twitter. My handle is at Coach Tasha Scott. And if you're in the Montgomery Tri-County area and you are available the first Thursday of every month, I would love for you to come out to Ladies Who Lunch. We meet at Martha's Place. And again, this is my drama-free, safe space that I love helping women connect to each other and to resources in our community. This coming month, July, is going to be on the second Thursday, but all the other ones the first Thursday of each month.
Thank you. Dr. Wilbon?
So, and before I say my information, one of the things I'm hoping you guys will do a piece on, I was going to talk about it a little today, but we ended up, everything was so full in terms of the conversation that we were having. But one of the things I failed to mention that I do believe is important, and that is a lot of times in our community, particularly with African-American women, the addiction issues are related to mental health challenges. Mm-hmm. And it is a self-medicating thing that is happening. And so often when you see particularly mothers that are unable to take care of their children due to addiction, it usually is really rooted in a mental health challenge that they are self-medicating. And so I'd love to come back and do a piece with you guys about that, because I don't think there's enough understanding, even among the helping professionals, that when you see so many people with addictive problems, it usually is related to some sort of trauma or mental health and or, you know, all of those things at the same time. And so I am a Silly Consultants at Gmail, and that's ASILICONSULTANTS at Gmail. And on Twitter, I'm at Dr. spelled out _ Rhonda, RHONDA.
And so just as you mentioned addictions, and we've talked a little bit about this, another colleague and I are currently working on a chapter about mental health and women of color. And interestingly enough, close to 70% of the women who are identified as having addictive or addiction issues also are disordered. So
Absolutely.
They have another mental health disorder, they have other personality disorders. So at 70%, that suggests that there is a high likelihood that folks who are addicted have not been diagnosed early on in life and haven't been treated. And so they begin to, as Dr. Wilbon suggested, they start to self-treat. They don't feel right. They can't figure out why their thinking is what it is. And so, you know, smoking a joint, drinking a beer, you know, smoking crack.
Absolutely. And the new thing, yeah, I'm sorry. And the new thing that's coming up is the self-mutilation. We were seeing that with the white girls. Now it's happening more with Black girls. I've done a lot of work with teenagers that grew up in foster care that are doing self-mutilation, and not just self-mutilation, but tattooing as well is related to the self-mutilation. And so it's this whole thing around, can I still feel pain? If I can still feel pain, then I know that I'm still alive. And see, so we got some deep stuff, you know, and the way that it shows up for us may have some differences, but I mean, it's kind of, I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but I didn't want to leave this without mentioning those two things, because those are two of the things that we're seeing more of in our community. And so it isn't just something happening over there anymore.
And can I just share, like, you hit it right on, because that was one of the things that I did before going to counseling, was the self-mutilation. And I never shared that publicly, but that was the thing. The pain diverted away from the real pain that I was feeling. And I was addicted to that, you know? And it, again, going back to the counseling and therapy, I didn't even realize that that's what I was doing until getting the professional help.
Yeah. And we have to talk about these issues. Thank you for being so transparent, Tasha. We have to talk about these issues in our community because it's always the other. You know, and as I'm doing this reading in preparation for a couple of different things, I'm recognizing how much of the other is now us. Right.
Absolutely.
You know, we've been, you know, they do this, they do that. We don't do that. Well,
Right.
for the last 25 years, we've been doing it.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's important to acknowledge it because I think that acknowledgement helps in the community spaces that we're talking about, people to recognize that it's not a other thing. That yes, oh, we have to deal with this. We have to address it. We have to provide the support necessary. We have to support the folks who are managing it, their families, create opportunities for them to be healthy, for them to create spaces that are conducive to that health, being conscious about what spaces might be adding to the stressors that bring some of these issues to the fore. You know, sometimes, as I think Tasha said earlier, sometimes it's the church that causes it, right? You know, sometimes it's that uncle, it's that aunt, it's that grandmother, it's that sixth corporal punishment use, you know, whatever it is, we have to address it and we have to be honest about what's going on with our families, with our young women, with our children. And it's important, you know, we both, Rhonda and I, you know, serve children as well. And, you know, when you're talking to the mom and she's saying, I don't know why she's cutting. I don't know why, I just heard you, you know, call her out of her name coming down the hallway. You know, I need you to understand partially why she's cutting.
Right.
And so it's important for us to be honest about this stuff. As long as we continue to hide it and continue to, you know, pretend that it's not in our midst, then it won't get any better.
That's right.
Coming out from behind the masks, really, allowing ourselves to be seen. And Tasha, you being transparent, and finally realizing that it's okay for us to accept the help. I think one of the struggles that I've had was feeling, you know, that image of being strong, right? You being strong and feeling like, okay, if I say this, then that means that I'm not as strong as I thought I was.
Yeah.
But I'm unable to breathe, which is one of the reasons I really appreciated this poem. You're you're just holding all this stuff in, and one or two things gonna happen. You're gonna pop, heart attack, stroke, something like that, or you will maybe take your life. Really. So being able to come out from behind the mask to ask for help, and then to be able to accept the help. Oh my gosh, that's a huge piece, because it's okay to not have it all together.
And to recognize, and I've had this discussion with several young sisters, that, you know, we talk about stress, we talk about distress and eustress, right? The two different kinds of stressors. That eustress is something that you kind of want to have because it motivates you. You know, you got something to do, you have 3 things you got to do, all 3 of them are priority, it moves you to get it done. Distress is what we want to avoid, right? Those things that continue to eat at you, that you don't ever release. But that stress and even depressed mood is natural. No one can be heightened every day, every hour of the day. That's unhealthy, right? Your body needs to calm, and sometimes to even move beyond calm into the depressed mode. The problem is when it's an extended experience, right?
Absolutely.
All of us will experience depression.
Absolutely.
Depressed mood. That's all depression means. Depressed mood. That you're not of a heightened mood, you're thoughtful, you might be kind of sad, but when it extends, what is it, 3 or 5 days, Ron? I forget what the DSM says, but when you have that experience for an extended period of time is when it becomes a problem.
Absolutely.
We also have to make sure that people understand you're going to have to deal with sadness.
Absolutely.
It's a part of being a human.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we have to model for our daughters and the younger women these things. This is our time. Like, I feel like this is the thing that we add to the universe. We add now as Black women in our age group, we add to the universe this whole ideal of, I can be all of that in terms of being, you know, awesome and great and powerful, whatever, but also have days and times and periods and spaces when that is not who I am. And it's okay. That doesn't take away from my strength. And so showing the women coming after us that it's okay not to always be in that powerful place, that we have to have balance, and we have to show them that, you know, that balance is, that, you know, how to manage balance and how to, you know, maintain that in a different kind of way that I think we were modeled.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, guys, this has been phenomenal. I'm afraid that we're getting ready to get cut off. We've moved through this discussion. I want to thank you all so much, Tasha Scott McDonald and Dr. Wilbon, for being here with us. We will share this video with you very soon. And we thank you all for participating. And do come back. We're going to take Dr. Wilbon up on that offer to talk about addictions. And we'll be in touch with you. Have an awesomely blessed weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Mommy Chronicles with Denise Davis May and Tanya Scott Williams. Listen anytime on blogtalkradio.com/Mommy Chronicles. Do you have a show idea you'd like to share with us? Well, send it to us on Facebook, on Twitter, or email it to mommychronicles2014@gmail.com. The Mommy Chronicles, your partners in raising phenomenal children.